This is Andy Brown with C Squared Ciders, and I'm here with your craft beer and brewing tip of the week. There's ways that you can influence the fermentation to leave a little residual sugar behind. And in fact, the hallmark of some good ciders is a little bit of sweetness to balance out the acidity and the tannin, like I mentioned before. So there's basically three ways you can go about kind of influencing the residual sugar. Now, the first way is through temperature. So if you take this carboy near the end of fermentation, say you measure the residual sugar and it's down around 2% residual sugar, you can take that carboy and put it in a refrigerator, and the cold will make the yeast go dormant and settle out, leaving behind some sugar in the juice. So you can then rack the cider off the lees and have a pretty stable semi-sweet cider. Another way to influence the fermentation is mechanical separation, and by mechanical I mean filtration. So if you filter the cider when it's near the end of fermentation, you can leave a little residual sugar behind by pulling the yeast out of the cider with filtration. The third way that you can kind of influence the fermentation is chemically. So there are certain chemicals that you can add which will kill off the yeast. It's kind of like selection, natural selection of the fittest. And the thing to remember with sulfites is your additions to the cider are cumulative. So if we know that sulfite is perceptible in cider, maybe around 50 to 80 parts per million, as kind of a matchstick or kind of a sulfury aroma and flavor. If you're adding 10 parts per million in your washing of the apples or of the juice, and then you add another 20 during fermentation and then another 20 parts per million at the end of fermentation for maturation, you're gonna be at 50 parts per million, which is, you know, where a lot of people can start to perceive sulfites in the juice. There are some more high-tech ways that commercial cider makers have. There's a chemical called Curran that some cider makers use, which is literally a poison that you add to the cider that kills any yeast or bacteria and then breaks down into its chemical components, which makes it okay for food use, basically. But that's way beyond the range or scope of most home cider makers, but it is kind of a secret of modern cider production. Even cider makers who call themselves craft cider makers and bemoan industrial ciders use Curran in their ciders. So it's not very well known, but it is the technique. To learn more about making cider, click on the link below.